Well, hey everybody, thanks for joining us on the Faith RX podcast this season in conjunction with the Fossores Chapter House. I'm Dave McDonald and my co-host Liz Kirchmeier, the CEO of Faith RX. And today we're joined by our good friend Ryan Grinnell, a Faith RX chaplain and the director of the Austin Fire Academy. Is that right? Is the director your official title?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Austin Community College. Yep.
Of Austin Community College. Yeah, yeah. Right on, man. So what does your work entail? Like what do you actually do? Do you fight fires or just children?
So that's a tricky one. So who's going to listen to this podcast? I got to make sure that the answer is correct. I'm kidding. So what we do is we are a community college fire training academy, and we prepare anyone who wants to become a firefighter. We train them and get them prepared for the state certification, and then they take their state certification test, and then they can become a firefighter, and they can go anywhere in the state of Texas. So I work for Austin Community College, and we have a fire academy, and that's what I do. So I've been in the fire service a little over 25 years. Began my career in 1999 in the Air Force as an active duty firefighter. I went DoD federal firefighter after that. Um, and then in 2012, stepped away for a little while for about 6 years. My dad passed away. My wife and I moved to West Texas, where she's from, and started our own CrossFit gym. Man, it was a community, and it was one of those families. And so now I take that same leadership approach at the fire academy, and it's family, it's unity, it's biblical, and God has used every semester to prune me and grow and shape and get rid of the things that don't belong there so that I can be holy and righteous all the days of my life.
Yeah. Yeah, and what was your CrossFit journey like? You said you started in the military?
Yeah, so I started in the military. When my dad passed away in 2012, I got depressed. I got into a bad depression. Um, you know, PTSD is one of those things that we deal with as first responders, military, things like that, and it becomes a normal way of life almost. We deal with it and we don't even realize it until sometimes it hits in certain ways. But CrossFit was around way before then. Um, People just weren't calling it CrossFit, and it was functional fitness at high intensity. Doing varied movements. But when I was in the middle of that funk, I was a company officer, and my crew was like, "Hey, LT," I was a lieutenant at the time, and they were like, "Hey, LT, man, come join us, come work out with us." And I wasn't into that. I was into bench, squat, deadlift, maybe do a little running on the treadmill and do some curls for the girls. That was what I was into. It's like, just let me lift. That's all I want to do.
Hang on, I want to write that down because I have new body goals.
Yeah. And so that's what I was into. But they were like, "Man, come do this with us. Like, it'll make you feel better." I'm like, "All right." So I started doing it with them, and sure enough, man, like afterwards I was smoked, and it was one of the hardest things that I'd done working out wise. But it helped bring me out of that depression, and that door that I walked through, um, joining a CrossFit, community within the firehouse, was the beginning of our journey with it, and it's been a part of our lives ever since.
That's awesome. And what about Faith RX? How did you get connected to Faith RX?
Well, we initially got started with Faith RX when we moved to Bastrop. So we ran our CrossFit gym in Snyder for 6 years. And then in 2018, we sold it when I took the job here in Austin at the Fire Academy. Well, our friends owned, or a friend of ours owns CrossFit 2024. Um, no shameless plug there, just proud of my boy. And he's over here, he's here in Austin, and he runs a gym. And so they were starting a Faith RX chapter, and they were like, "Hey, man, do you want to be the chaplain?" I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And so jumped in, started doing it, and it was amazing. It was really good.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on redemption because I don't want to tell any part of your story, but you and I have had some great conversations about the fact that there's no path so crooked that God can't grab us and get us back going straight. And you've had some incredible moments in your life that have really been a faith affirming for me and really have bonded our friendship. So what have you learned about redemption?
when I think of the word redemption here recently, it's come up more as that's the entire point of the book of Revelation. It's to reveal redemption. And the opening script, the opening verses to Revelation seem to get, overshadowed by the world ending three times by chapter 6 and all the demonic and all the angelic and all the woman of Jezebel on the bed. Like we read all this other stuff, but the very opening verses of the chapter are like, he who reads this book will be blessed. Like we forget that, we skip over that. But the whole point of reading Revelation isn't to get involved or so involved in the story that the entire theme of it is overlooked, and it's all about redemption. I mean, that's the whole point of the Bible is redemption. And the one thing that man, when I just think of that word redemption, I just think of the places that I've been and the things that God has literally rescued me out of. I ought to be in the ground 3 or 4 times over by now. And not just that, but I think even worse than that is, how do I put it? Is if our heart is still beating, but our spirit's in the ground. We could be alive, but we could be so dead inside. And I mean, those are the times and those are the days that I remember. And I just think about how good that the Lord is. One of the main themes that really has been he's been opening my eyes to recently is we praise because of the past victories in our lives, and we worship in the present, remembering the past. And I think that's a really holy thing, especially on Memorial Day today. We worship. Everything that we do is worship. It's whether it's work or working out, whether it's laughing with our friends and kids, or crying because we just lost a loved one. Like everything that we do can be worship, but worship is in the present. And praise, we get our praise and praises from the events of the past, and we remember those things, and we worship in the present while remembering the past. We've been fed this thing that, oh, you got to forget the past and leave it in the past. And yeah, leave the failures, leave the negative, leave the things in the past that were hurtful and bad and all this other stuff, but don't forget them. Just don't live there. Yeah. Don't make that your zip code.
Yeah, my friend Len likens it to being on a swing. When you go to a playground and you're a kid and you get on the swing set, that the only way you can make any forward movement is by leaning back. So we lean back on the past, we lean back on our history, we lean back on our tradition, and it's that shifting momentum into the past that propels us forward. And I always think of I like the word metabolize. We metabolize the past. The past is the fuel for the present. And it's funny because the Bible has this peculiar relationship with time. First of all, because when most of the people who wrote portions of the Bible wrote it, they weren't writing it in the present tense. Like nobody wrote the story of the Garden of Eden while they were sitting, on top of a fig leaf talking to a snake. Like it got written later. The story of Babel got written later. The story of the Exodus got written down later. So everybody who's writing much of the Old Testament is remembering what happened and choosing which portions to emphasize and choosing which story to tell, and they choose to tell the story of the faithfulness of God. In our lives, we have all kinds of nasty stuff in our past, and it's up to us to decide if we're going to tell the story of God's past faithfulness. Because of course we have disappointments, of course we have frustrations in the past, but if you live out of those disappointments, it's like you're eating junk food. You remember the times that you failed, you remember the times that church let you down, you remember the times that people hurt your feelings, you remember how somebody was a jerk to you, you remember how everybody's a piece of garbage except you. And when you live in that past, it's like you're living on potato chips and Snickers bars. You got no nutrition. Your body can't turn that into energy for the present, and you hold out no hope for the future. Yeah. But when you're
a victim, and then you're like, re-victimizing yourself over and over and over.
Yeah. And of course there are people who are actual victims, and everybody in some sense has experienced some level of victimization. But all of us have to struggle or wrestle with whether or not we're going to choose to tell our story that way, regardless of how it compares to anybody else's. And when we do that, then we're in trouble, man. We're in real trouble for ourselves.
Yeah. One of the journeys God's been taking me on recently is just it's a one-on-one journey with wisdom, and First Corinthians 1, I believe it's 30. It says, we're united now with Christ, and God made Christ to be wisdom itself. And so when we're chasing after wisdom, we're actually chasing after Jesus. And this verse this morning that I read, Proverbs, and it was 27:7. It says, a person who's full refuses honey, but even bitter food tastes sweet to the hungry. And for those of us that have actually had those bitter areas and bitter moments in our lives, or areas of hurt, areas of pain, areas of shameful stuff that we've done, like the food of his rich love and his just passion for us, even that bitterness, he turns it it tastes sweet to us because he can turn it to that way. When his first miracle was turning water to wine, he could take the bitter and make it sweet. You know what I mean? Like he could take that, and that food for us, like that's fuel for us. I love the way you said it metabolizes. We take those bitter moments, we take those hurtful moments, we take the shame in our past, and we allow him to transform our hearts. We become who we truly were created to be, because then we're eating the real food from the vine. We're not separated from the vine. We're staying attached, and we're getting the nutrients straight from him. So that food is then what fuels us. When's the last time you went on vacation, or you had a family outing, or you did something and everything went smoothly and it was great? Like,
it's the next time. The next time I go on vacation, that's what's going to happen. It'll be the first time, but I feel good about it.
Yeah, because if nothing happens, you're not gonna remember. You're gonna go, oh yeah, that was really a cool trip. I remember how everything just went smoothly. Like there was, it was nice, and it was, but when the things happen, like say last year we went to this mission trip in Mexico, and it was, dude, I'm telling you, we saw miracles, we saw healings, we saw physical manifestations, we saw demonic spirits cast out, we saw a wide range of things in the Bible. I think pretty much the only thing we didn't see was water to wine or somebody dead being raised. But that could happen this time. You never know. But what we do experience, like everything kind of went smooth, and then on the way back home, we couldn't land in Austin because these microburst thunderstorms came up and it shut the airport down. Then they send us to Dallas, shut Dallas down. Then they send us to San Antonio. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We're finally landing in San Antonio and we're stranded. So like all the parents from Austin had to drive to San Antonio to pick this whole group of youth and adults up and haul them back to Austin. Like those are the things, like even in the sweet and the great things that were happening over the time, like then that happens. Yeah. But you remember it because then you can go, Lord, even in that time, like you were with us. Even then, you were with us. You were feeding us. And when we allow ourselves, it's just like CrossFit and just like nutrition. When you're disciplined enough to do the things that help you grow, you have freedom. It reminds me of that town drunk on Andy Griffith. I always forget his name. But he would always run into the prison, run into jail, and put himself in jail. You remember that? Yeah. Like he would always run in, like Andy and Barney Fife would like watch him run in, and then he'd shut the door, and he's like, "Oh, okay, well, I don't have to go arrest him." He arrested himself. He put himself in jail. Like we do that so many times. Yeah. We put ourselves in prison. We shut that door, and we try to close it. But Jesus has already given us the keys because he's given us the authority. We have to have the discipline to keep that door open and not step back into it.
So what do you feel like God's teaching you right now? I mean, you've come through so much, you've been through so much. Now you're I mean, you said your son and daughter-in-law are expecting. You get a new housing situation. I mean, sort of the world is your oyster right now. What do you feel like God's saying to you?
I think right now, the time coming, if I'm looking back, it's healthy to look in the rearview mirror because you got to know what's behind you, remind you where you came from. Um, I feel like what he's leading us into right now is, oh man, how do I? You kind of opened up with it, and it's not being fearful of stepping out and doing the things that you've never done. Um, I don't know how long I'll be working for ACC. I absolutely love my job. The Lord's used it every semester uh, to reach kids. I say kids; these guys are adults, um, but I feel like there's things that are happening spiritually in the entire body of Christ that have never happened before in our era and in our age. And I think that may be the new Isaiah thing that he's doing. He's doing a new thing, and it may not be a way that it's the brand new thing that it's never been done, but it's never been done in our situations. I mean, we're seeing fivefold ministry hubs and training centers, and it's like the church has completely walked away from apostolic prophetic. They'll throw a little evangelist in there, but mostly it's pastors and teachers. It's like, if you're a cessationist, I don't see where the Holy Spirit stops working. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so, if God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then that same God that fulfilled the Joel 2:28 prophecy in Acts is still speaking. I mean, if your name is the Word, are you telling me you're not going to speak? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. His name is the Word, and he's not going to speak anymore? Come on. We just got to be listening.
The actual better definition, because the word that you're referring to in Koine Greek is logos, and the worst translation of logos is the word word. And Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato all love to play with the idea of the logos. And Socrates said, or pardon me, it's Heraclitus that said that the best way to understand the word logos is to think of a big stick. And if you grab two ends of a big stick and you pull it together to create tension so that it's curved, and you join the ends of that stick together with a string, that string is the logos. It's the unifying energy that holds two opposites together. And with that stick, Heraclitus said, you can do two things, because you've got now a bow, right? So with this bow, you can do two things. You can either harm or you can heal. You can harm because the bow can be turned into a weapon, a bow and arrow. You can shoot things, kill it, whatever, a tool. Or you can heal because it can also be turned into a stringed instrument, like a bow that you play like a violin. And I love that Jesus is the unifying principle, bringing two opposites together. I think about all like the diversity within the disciples, that's bringing opposites together. I mean, how do you bring Simon the Zealot together with Matthew the tax collector? Those two people hated each other. Every possible enmity existed between tax collectors and zealots. You think Democrats and Republicans can't get along? Tax collectors and zealots were murderously opposed to one another. And Jesus is the only power in the universe that can bring Democrats and Republicans or pacifists and soldiers into the same room. Because if we elevate Jesus above all competing concerns, we're drawn closer to the heart of God, and we can cooperate with God and heal the world. But if we get focused on our end of the stick, hey, it's got to be like this. These are my politics. These are my principles. These are my the things that I'm going to be triggered by, or these are my pet causes. Well, then you're not focusing on Jesus anymore. You're not focusing on the Logos, on the unifying energy that brings opposites together. You know, how can Jesus be the God of justice and righteousness, but also be the God of grace and mercy? Well, because he's bringing two opposites together. How can the same Spirit convict us of sin and yet assure us that our sins will not be counted against us? Because he's bringing two opposites together. And I think that's the thing that so many Christians miss about Jesus when we reduce him to, and you didn't do this, I'm just ranting because that's a preacher's proclivity, but when Christians reduce Jesus to a word, we think that the word in question is a proposition. We think that it's like some little phrase or some dogmatic saying or some principle, and if you'll just memorize this principle, you'll do everything that God intends. But Jesus was totally averse to verses. Yeah. I mean, he was constantly challenging people who thought in such stringent, myopic little ways. Instead, he was blowing open the doors and reframing people's conceptions about absolutely everything. That's why Jesus' favorite phrase was, "You've heard it said, but I say to you." You think you know what the scriptures are about, but clearly you don't, because you've misinterpreted them. So I think, yes, you're right. He's still speaking. The word is still speaking, and the manner of his speech and the manner of his activity remains bringing two opposites together, creating tension and creating unity where nobody else is even capable of.
Yeah, and I love how you said that. The way you explain that, bringing two opposites together. That's one of the biggest realities that he's bringing me into right now. Is I know that I'm a son of God. I know that I'm a son of the King, but it's living in sonship that is actually the most important thing, because we can hear fivefold ministry, we can hear mission, we can hear all these great words and great things that we're doing, but if we don't live from our identity, and that's living in the fear of the Lord and actually understanding what that means, then everything else is just kind of like you said, it's just memorizing phrases and repeating them. And we've reduced the Lord down to policies and procedures, not spirit and truth.
Yeah, right.
We made him a manual instead of a living word. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's very, very possible, wouldn't it be, if it happened to the Pharisees and they knew the word better than anybody, but they couldn't recognize him standing right in front of him. And wouldn't it be the same as history repeats itself, because we tend to forget the past and we don't learn from our mistakes, that we've done that now? I mean, look at the Jesus movement. It was, hey, come out and be separated. And now we've created this chasm in between believers and non-believers, where that was almost like the establishment of the establishment. That's where the church, little C church, established itself. And now we're like, well, don't be like the world. Don't be like the world. Well, aren't we here to go after the people in the world? We can understand, but when you live and the reason, and I think this is the reason Jesus he knew who he was. He lived as the Son of God every single day of his life. So it didn't matter where he went. He was led by the Spirit. He had the Spirit in him and upon him, and he was led by the Spirit. So he could go anywhere, into any situation, and bring those two total opposites together, because that is about unity. And it's about unity in the body. And wasn't that Jesus's prayer before he was crucified? He's like, Father, I pray that they are one, just like you and I are one. And he's bringing us into unity in the body. But my left index finger doesn't do anything that my right elbow does. Doesn't even look the same, doesn't do anything the same.
The 12-year-old part of me wants to keep playing the body parts and what they do game.
Yeah. That's why I had to go a little higher to my fingers.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with the Pharisees, and also with Jesus loving the world. I did a word study on the word world which in Greek is cosmos. I don't remember what the Hebrew and Aramaic words off the top of my head, but in Greek was cosmos, and in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, when you look at the whole Bible in Greek, I think there was 165 or 166 uses of the word world, and 50% of them are negative, and 50% of them are positive. And it's a really sort of interesting case study in a topical survey of the scripture, because there's, for God so loved the world, God did not come into the world to condemn it but to save it. So you got these positive God loves the world statements, and then you got these negative ones that are like, friendship with the world is enmity toward God. And so you sort of get confused. You're like, am I supposed to love the world or hate it? God loves it, except sometimes God's mad at it. Am I supposed to love it, but sometimes be mad at it? Like it just gets a bit confusing. And there's a TikTok theologian or probably not theologian, biblical scholar, Dan McClellan, who's quite popular. And I really like what he has to say on concerning this idea. He goes, at the end of the day, everything in the Bible comes down to what you're going to do with it. And if you're already a jerk, the Bible's only going to make it worse. You're going to find verses that will justify you being a goof. And if you're a person committed to love and committed to serving others, you're going to find plenty of material in the Bible to justify loving and serving others. So the question is not, can I find a verse that tells me what to do? The question is, are the verses that I'm finding cultivating in me love, or are the verses that I'm finding cultivating in me judgment, hypocrisy, religion, exclusivity? And I think, because I've been a pastor for so long, and everybody's got a verse to justify whatever. Polyamory, polygamy, there's verses for that. Slavery, there's verses for that. Patriarchy, racial prejudice, systemic racism, you can find verses for all that. And shame on you for finding them, and triple shame on you for using them. Instead, find the stuff that lines up with the life and the teachings and the ministry of Jesus. And that's why I think increasingly Christians need to be re-Christianized, because we're too biblical and we're too broadly Christian. We're like American Christian instead of Jesus Christian, or we're Pauline Christian instead of Jesus Christian, or we're Old Testament, kill the foreigner Christian instead of Jesus Christian. And you can justify all of those things with chapters and verses in the Bible, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Jesus is the fulfillment of the law. Paul says love is the fulfillment of the law. So if love is not your governing star, if love is not your hermeneutic, if love is not your exegetical framework, if it doesn't come down to love, you're screwing it up, man. And I just think that's a thing that we can't say often enough, loud enough.
I'm gonna jump on with you. I agree. I think we are now, and I think that there's more of a. I almost liken it to when Elijah asks God to open his servant's eyes, and he opens his eyes and he sees that there's more for us than against us, and they were there the whole time. We just have to see that, and when we realize it, and I think that's what he's been really growing in me, is that heart and compassion for who he really is. Because if we really expressed the God that loves us to the world could not hate him. Like the people in the world. And it's funny you brought that up about the world, because I did a word study on the word flesh, and it's sarx. Mm-hmm. And it's neither masculine nor feminine. It's sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. And that's the way that they use the word flesh. Well, when it says that we have to die to ourselves, well, okay, what does that mean, Lord? It's like, what do I die to myself? Well, Solomon said in Proverbs, the human heart's never satisfied. Human desires never satisfied. But when we're full of the love of the Lord and what he's actually done in us, and we remember that and we walk in that, his spirit actually leads us. And it's not our spirit leading us. You might feel that flare up every now and then, like you get because you CrossFit and everything always hurts. Like you'll get a flare up and go, oh man, maybe no kipping pull-ups today. But it's under control. It's the same way with our spirit and our flesh, our sarx. When the Holy Spirit is actually number one in our lives, he leads us. because we've been taught, and I'm sure you guys have, being in the South is a little different than when I visited you guys in Michigan and everything else. It's a totally different world, just just in the Christian world.
Yeah.
So when we look at it and go, I feel like we have been fed this line of, well, do I really hear from the Lord? And questioning it, we go, well, it may be the Lord, but it's probably just me. No, he's our father, and I'm a dad of two boys. I always want to talk to them, and I'm not a perfect father. He is. So how much more does our father want to talk to us? All we got to do is listen, because the word says that he is visible in everything, in the trees and the birds and the grass and anything, in beauty and nature. He's speaking to us through that. And that doesn't mean the tree talks to us, but as we're looking at a tree and it's swaying in the breeze, he might say something that reminds us that he's there. And he might say something that brings unity into a situation. Take, for example, the palm tree. If you're looking at a palm tree and it's in the middle of a hurricane, that palm tree was designed to bend and bend and bend and bend and not break. Like how metaphorical is that of our lives?
Yeah.
We could use that illustration in any situation, but we over, I don't want to, instead of over spiritualizing it, we over personalize it. That's it. It's like, we need to flip the script and go, we really do live in the upside down world. It's like in Stranger Things, you've got the real world, you got the upside down world. We live in the upside down world, and the kingdom is right side up. Everything in the kingdom is by invitation only. God's not going to break down the door and force himself in. He's knocking. He's knocking, and he wants us. He wants him to be invited in, but he wants us to do this journey of life and have it be an adventure with him.
You're absolutely right. You brought up Revelation earlier in the podcast, and I love the image toward the end of the book of Revelation. After all the judgment and all the nonsense, we get a description of the heavenly city, the New Jerusalem coming down like a bride adorned for her husband. And you get all this description from John the Revelator about how the walls of heaven are all these different precious materials and precious stones, and how these gates are carved out of single pearls, these massive gates. And then there's this line in Revelation where John says, and the gates are never shut. And the kings of the earth will bring in their tributes to the one who sits on the throne. And I love that, because all the way through Revelation, all the way through the Bible, the quote unquote kings of the earth are bad. They're always adversarial to the purposes of God. They're God's enemies. They're his self-proclaimed enemies. So I love that at the very end of the Bible, even God's enemies are like, yeah, all right, this is pretty cool. We're coming over for the barbecue. Yeah, we're like, those are pretty neat gates. Thanks for not keeping us outside. It's such a cool image, and it speaks to what you were saying about invitation, that God is going, hey, look, we're not willing that anybody perish. We want everybody to experience mercy and grace and hope and righteousness and gladness and fraternity and love. And we just, come on in. BYO, King of the Earth. Yeah. Yeah. Well, any last thoughts for our listeners, for those folks who are tuning in, who are curious about the spirituality of the body, the worth of what we do in the gym, and how it accelerates and enhances our ministry?
One thing I would challenge anybody that hasn't yet is I would sit down and I would ask God, especially if you're questioning if God still speaks. I would ask him, what are some lies that I believe about myself? And I want you to write down the first things that come to your mind. Because normally that's the Lord telling you the lies. He wants to reveal the lies that we have believed about ourselves. But he won't stop there. And then chew on that for a second, then ask him, well, what are the truths? And write down the first things that come to your mind, and trust that he is going to speak to you. And watch it unfold right before your eyes. Because what's happening now in the world is he's pouring out more and more of who he really is into his sons and daughters, and the spirit that is within us. He gave us 100% of the spirit when we were born again. And that spirit lives in us. And just like the gym, you've got to start somewhere. You have to start somewhere. Don't be afraid to be a beginner, and step right in to your destiny and your journey, knowing that your Father and the King of Kings is in you, He is within you, and He is leading you through this journey and through this adventure, and know that you are never defeated. Know that you're never defeated. Just be encouraged, guys. I can't tell you enough how impactful Dave has been in my life, and Liz. We've been able to talk really deep about some things a couple of times, and I love what the Lord is doing in y'all's lives, and I just see two individuals that are you're kingly. Not in the evil sense that you brought up, Dave, but
Yeah.
I was like, wait, how do I take that?
Yeah.
I don't know. Thank you, maybe.
people that are kingly. You lead very well. You are royalty. And when you walk in that authority and you walk in that identity of being a son and a daughter of the King of Kings, you guys, you live it every day. You're two beautiful individuals. You got beautiful hearts, and you want to touch people's lives. And I just want to encourage you, Liz. I've seen your business grow from when you first started to now where you're at, and I see, the family aspect of it now and everything that you've got. I'm like, not just the Lord's blessing on you, but your mother heart. You have such a heart of a mother that it's beautiful to see you walking that out every day. Not only to your family, but also to your gym family. And now to the rest of Faith RX. Like, you are the perfect person for that spot. And I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
I want a shirt now for you that says Gym Mother.
Yeah, I am
That's
your gym mommy.
yeah. I've seen Den Mother, but Gym Mother is a whole other thing. Well, thanks for being with us, man. We love you tons, and we're so proud of you, and we just want to add our enthusiasm and our joy to everything that you're doing. Much love to you and your family, and blessings on you in the future, dude. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight, man.